The waves crashed against the hull as the morning sun began to rise over the vast stretch of the Pacific. But this was no ordinary patrol. On the radar screen of a U.S. Coast Guard cutter, a fast-moving vessel had appeared, small, agile, and moving suspiciously close to a known smuggling route. Within seconds, the crew went from routine operations to high alert. The unidentified boat wasn't responding to radio calls. It was pushing its engines to the limit, cutting across the water like a blade. Coast Guard intelligence had been monitoring cartel activity in the region for weeks, and this vessel matched the profile of a go-fast boat, the kind frequently used by drug traffickers to move massive amounts of narcotics quickly and covertly. The captain issued a clear order: intercept. Engines roared to full power as the cutter closed in. Over the loudspeaker, the Coast Guard demanded the vessel stop immediately. But instead of slowing down, the cartel boat accelerated. At that moment, the Coast Guard realized they weren't dealing with inexperienced smugglers. This was a coordinated run, and the traffickers were willing to risk everything to escape. A high-speed pursuit began. The Coast Guard deployed a small, rapid-response interceptor to get closer. These smaller boats are designed for agility, capable of matching the speed of cartel vessels while allowing armed officers to engage directly. As the interceptor drew nearer, crew members spotted masked men aboard the suspect boat, frantically tossing packages overboard, a clear sign they were trying to get rid of incriminating evidence before capture. The situation escalated when one of the suspects appeared to reach for a weapon. The Coast Guard's rules of engagement are strict, but their priority is always the safety of the crew. Over the radio, authorization was given to disable the vessel. A warning shot cracked through the morning air, echoing across the waves. The smugglers didn't stop. A second shot targeted the engine block, striking it cleanly. The roar of the cartel boat's engine sputtered, then died. Within minutes, the Coast Guard team boarded the vessel. What they found was staggering: concealed compartments packed with high-grade narcotics, satellite communication devices, and GPS trackers programmed to follow a precise route along the coastline. This wasn't an improvised operation. It was part of a sophisticated smuggling network stretching across international waters. As the suspects were detained, investigators began piecing together clues from the equipment found on board. The GPS route pointed toward a remote stretch of coastline in Central America, a location previously flagged as a cartel offloading point. What stood out was the precision of the timing. The smugglers had planned to slip through a narrow patrol gap that only existed for a brief window. Somehow, they knew the Coast Guard's regular patterns. That raised a serious question. Was there an insider leak, or had the cartel developed advanced surveillance capabilities? The seized boat and suspects were escorted to a secure facility. Meanwhile, intelligence analysts dug into encrypted communications intercepted during the chase. Patterns began to emerge, linking this operation to a larger cartel faction known for blending maritime smuggling with advanced technological countermeasures. And just as U.S. authorities were preparing to announce the successful interception, a separate alert came through. Another vessel, similar in size and speed, had just appeared on radar, hundreds of miles away but following the exact same navigation route. The operations center lit up with urgency. Screens displayed the new radar contact, moving at an almost identical speed and heading as the first cartel vessel. Analysts quickly overlaid the two routes, and the match was undeniable. This wasn't a coincidence. The first boat had been a decoy. While the Coast Guard was busy seizing drugs and interrogating suspects, a second, potentially larger shipment was already in motion. Orders were relayed instantly to nearby patrol units. Helicopters stationed on the coast were scrambled, their rotors cutting through the humid air as they raced toward the target zone. At the same time, a second Coast Guard cutter that had been on standby altered its course. The clock was ticking. If the second vessel reached international waters or slipped into a blind zone near the coast, tracking it would become almost impossible. On board the operations deck, the tension was palpable. The cartel's strategy was becoming clear. By sacrificing one shipment, they'd hoped to divert attention and clear a path for a second, far more valuable load. It was a tactic borrowed from military deception playbooks, a deliberate distraction meant to stretch response teams thin. But this time, the Coast Guard wasn't backing off. As the helicopter neared the target area, its infrared sensors picked up the heat signature of the second vessel. It was larger than the first and carried a low radar profile, designed to make detection difficult. Through night vision optics, operators could see multiple individuals on deck, moving quickly and covering cargo with tarps. When the chopper switched on its spotlight, the smugglers reacted instantly, throwing the throttle forward and attempting evasive maneuvers in the darkness. The helicopter crew initiated aerial warnings, blasting commands over loudspeakers in both English and Spanish. But once again, there was no compliance. The smugglers were prepared. They began releasing smoke flares and chaff to confuse the aerial tracking systems, a level of sophistication rarely seen outside of military exercises. Back on the cutter, the captain gave the order to deploy pursuit teams. This was no longer just a drug bust, it was evolving into a full-scale maritime operation. The Coast Guard's fast interceptor boats launched off the deck, cutting through the waves in perfect formation. Each team had rehearsed scenarios like this countless times, but real operations were always unpredictable. Meanwhile, intelligence officers continued to interrogate the captured crew from the first boat. Under pressure, one of the men finally spoke, revealing that the second boat wasn't carrying ordinary narcotics. It was transporting something far more valuable to the cartel's leadership, something they were willing to fight for if cornered. But before he could reveal exactly what, alarms sounded again. The helicopter reported that the smugglers had activated a powerful jammer, disrupting both radio communication and GPS signals. For a brief, tense moment, the Coast Guard teams were flying blind on the open sea. Traditional navigation systems flickered. Radar screens displayed interference. The cartel had anticipated pursuit and prepared countermeasures to create confusion at the critical moment. But the Coast Guard had contingency protocols for electronic warfare scenarios. Using encrypted backup channels and old-school navigational techniques, they began to close in on the target's last known position. The chase was no longer just about speed, it was now a battle of strategy, technology, and endurance. And somewhere out there, under the cover of darkness and chaos, the second cartel vessel was making a desperate attempt to vanish into the night. The night had grown darker, and the wind had picked up, whipping the sea into rough, unpredictable waves. The Coast Guard interceptors pressed on, navigating through the jamming interference with disciplined precision. Every crew member knew that one wrong move in waters like this could flip a vessel or cost precious time. But retreat wasn't an option. The helicopter maintained visual contact using thermal imaging, circling high above the target to stay outside the jammer's strongest range. Through the static-filled comms, the pilot relayed intermittent updates, guiding the interceptors closer, meter by meter. The cartel vessel was pushing its engines to the absolute limit, leaving a chaotic foamy trail in its wake. It wasn't just fleeing, it was racing toward something. In the command center, analysts pored over maritime maps and past smuggling routes. Then, one analyst noticed something unsettling. About 20 nautical miles ahead of the cartel boat's trajectory lay an abandoned oil platform, decommissioned years ago, sitting in international waters. It had long been suspected of being used as a temporary cartel staging point, but no operation had ever confirmed it. Now, the vessel's heading lined up perfectly with that platform. The realization hit fast. The smugglers weren't planning to escape to shore, they were heading to rendezvous with another group. Perhaps a larger vessel, or worse, an armed escort waiting to transfer the cargo. The Coast Guard immediately adjusted their approach. Instead of a straight chase, they began to fan out, creating a multi-angle interception corridor to trap the smugglers before they could reach the platform. As the interceptors advanced, the cartel boat made a sharp, unexpected turn, a feint. Two smaller boats, previously hidden in the platform's shadow, suddenly emerged and accelerated toward the Coast Guard's flanks. They hadn't been detected on radar earlier, likely due to their low profiles and synchronized positioning with the structure. It was an ambush. Tracer rounds lit up the night as warning shots were fired. The cartel boats didn't back off. They responded by attempting aggressive ramming maneuvers to break the interception net. Coast Guard crews, trained for high-threat engagements, executed defensive turns, using their vessels' reinforced hulls to absorb glancing impacts while maintaining formation. The radio chatter was intense but controlled. Every second mattered. Above, the helicopter descended lower, its spotlight cutting through the chaos. From this vantage point, operators could now see the outline of a much larger vessel docked alongside the platform, a freighter with no active transponder, likely modified for smuggling. This explained the cartel's confidence. The smaller boats were never meant to outrun the Coast Guard. They were meant to buy enough time for the main transfer to be completed. The cutter captain made a decisive call. Reinforcements were still minutes away, but waiting could mean losing the entire shipment. The order went out to split forces. One team would engage the escort boats, while the others would push through toward the freighter. It was a risky maneuver, but hesitation would give the cartel the upper hand. As the interceptors accelerated toward the looming shadow of the platform, the smugglers escalated. High-powered floodlights from the freighter suddenly switched on, blinding the Coast Guard teams for a split second. In that moment of disorientation, the main cartel vessel slipped alongside the freighter, beginning what appeared to be a rapid offload. Heavy crates were hoisted up with cranes, disappearing onto the deck of the larger ship. The Coast Guard crews regained their vision and pressed forward, closing the distance. But the freighter's crew wasn't passive. Unmarked men on deck moved with military-like coordination, deploying smoke canisters and blocking cranes with improvised barriers to stall any boarding attempts. The operation had clearly been rehearsed. In the control room, the Coast Guard captain coordinated with Federal Command to authorize more aggressive measures. Boarding a freighter in international waters under these conditions wasn't routine. It carried serious geopolitical and operational risks. But letting the freighter escape could mean losing a critical lead into one of the most sophisticated maritime smuggling networks seen in years. The decision was made. A tactical boarding team, already prepped on board the cutter, was ordered to launch. Their RHIB boats hit the water, engines roaring, slicing through the waves toward the towering freighter as the platform loomed closer. And just as they were about to make contact, a sudden transmission crackled through, not from the Coast Guard, but from the freighter itself. A distorted voice, speaking in heavily accented English, came over the radio. "You're too late." Then, almost instantly, the freighter's lights cut out. Total darkness. The ship's engines roared to life. And deep below deck, something began to move. For a moment, everything was swallowed by the darkness. The freighter, the platform, even the surrounding sea seemed to hold its breath. Then the low, guttural sound of massive engines rumbled through the water. The freighter was moving, slowly at first, then gaining momentum. It was trying to break free before the Coast Guard could secure a boarding. The tactical team pushed forward through the choppy waves. Night vision goggles flicked on, painting the massive silhouette of the freighter in a glowing green outline. The men on deck were still obscured by smoke, but movement was visible, figures hauling something below decks in a hurry. Whatever was inside those crates wasn't just drugs. The urgency, the countermeasures, the level of coordination, it all pointed to something bigger. On board the Coast Guard cutter, the captain barked new orders. Flares shot into the night sky, illuminating the scene in a harsh red glow. The helicopter repositioned overhead, cutting through the smoke with its spotlight, trying to find any sign of escape routes or auxiliary vessels hidden nearby. Then, suddenly, sonar picked up a disturbing signal, multiple underwater contacts moving away from the freighter's hull. Divers. The cartel had deployed underwater teams, something almost unheard of in smuggling operations. They were likely planting charges, preparing scuttling procedures, or creating underwater confusion to delay interception. In the command room, it became clear, if the freighter couldn't escape, they were willing to destroy it and whatever evidence it held. The Coast Guard boarding team made their move. Grappling hooks and magnetic clamps locked onto the freighter's side as the RHIB boats maintained their positions against the powerful wake. One by one, heavily armed officers climbed up, vanishing over the railings and into the darkened decks. Inside, the atmosphere was tense and claustrophobic. Narrow corridors echoed with the sound of boots and distant machinery. Some compartments were locked down with reinforced barriers, while others were eerily abandoned, as if the crew had evacuated in a hurry. From below deck came the distant thud of heavy metal crates being shifted. The team advanced cautiously, splitting into units to cover more ground. On the bridge, the freighter's controls were unmanned. Navigation systems were running autonomously, pre-programmed to a set course. That meant someone had initiated a self-run escape sequence before abandoning the control deck. Meanwhile, sonar operators on the cutter confirmed the underwater contacts were moving toward the platform's foundation. If explosives were planted there, the entire structure could collapse, creating a hazardous field of debris and buying the freighter precious time to flee. The helicopter crew dropped sonar buoys into the water to track diver movements. A small submersible drone was launched to follow them. The divers were fast and well-coordinated, using rebreathers to avoid bubbles and detection. This wasn't amateur work. These were professionals, likely ex-special forces or cartel-trained combat divers. Back on the freighter, one of the boarding units forced open a cargo hold. Inside, instead of just narcotics, they found a series of heavily reinforced containers with biometric locks. No labels. No shipping documents. It was clear now why the cartel had fought so hard to protect this shipment. This wasn't standard contraband. This was something that could shift the entire investigation. Before they could examine the containers further, a sudden blast rocked the ship. The deck lurched violently. One of the underwater teams had detonated charges near the platform's support beams. Massive plumes of water shot upward as the structure began to groan and tilt. Debris scattered across the surface. The freighter's engines surged again, pushing the vessel forward in a desperate attempt to escape through the chaos. The Coast Guard cutter maneuvered aggressively to block its path, but the freighter's size and momentum made it a dangerous opponent. The tactical teams on board clung to railings as the ship's vibrations intensified. Through the static of disrupted radio channels, a chilling message came from one of the sonar buoys. Multiple additional contacts detected, fast-moving boats approaching from beyond the horizon. The cartel wasn't done. Reinforcements were on their way. The Coast Guard now faced a split-second decision: secure the mysterious cargo and risk being surrounded, or pull back before the cartel's reinforcements arrived in full force. Either choice carried enormous consequences, and the freighter was still pushing forward like a wounded animal determined to break through the net. And deep in the cargo hold, one of the biometric containers suddenly emitted a low electronic beep. The electronic beep echoed faintly through the cargo hold, cutting through the chaos like a warning signal. The boarding team froze for a fraction of a second. The sound was rhythmic and deliberate, unlike the random noises of machinery or waves. One of the officers quickly scanned the container panel. A small LED was blinking red, accompanied by a digital countdown. "Timer!" one of them shouted through the comms. The team instantly went into tactical mode. Two officers moved to secure the perimeter while the explosives specialist knelt beside the container, pulling out his toolkit. The screen on the lock was encrypted, displaying a pattern they didn't immediately recognize. This wasn't a standard explosive device. It looked like a hybrid, part biometric security, part fail-safe detonation mechanism. On the bridge, the Coast Guard commander received the update. With reinforcements closing in fast and the freighter trying to force its way through the blockade, the situation was escalating into a critical phase. The platform behind them continued to collapse, sending chunks of steel and concrete into the water. Navigation was becoming treacherous, but retreating now would mean abandoning the boarding team and letting the cartel disappear with whatever was inside that container. Meanwhile, the sonar team on the cutter reported that several diver signals had vanished. Either they had completed their task or they were regrouping for another strike. The The submersible drone caught a glimpse of one diver attaching something beneath the freighter's hull, possibly secondary charges or a remote-triggered device. The boarding team split further. One group stayed with the explosive specialist to handle the container, while the other advanced toward the engine room. If the freighter's propulsion could be disabled, it would buy them crucial time to stop the countdown and brace for incoming reinforcements. Below deck, the air grew hotter and louder. The engine room was a maze of pipes and catwalks, illuminated by emergency lights. As the team approached, they encountered two armed smugglers who had stayed behind. A brief but intense exchange erupted in the tight space, controlled bursts, shouts, and the metallic clang of ricochets. Within seconds, the Coast Guard team neutralized them, pushing forward to reach the control panels. On deck, the helicopter crew spotted the approaching fast boats, at least 5 of them, moving in a tight wedge formation. They were coming in fast, riding low over the waves to minimize radar reflection. The pilot called it in, and the cutter immediately began repositioning to intercept. But it was clear the reinforcements were heavily armed. This wasn't a rescue, it was an extraction force. Back in the cargo hold, the explosive specialist wiped sweat from his brow as he worked on the panel. The countdown continued to tick down, its tempo unrelenting. "This isn't just a bomb," he muttered. "It's wired to a remote kill switch. If someone offshore flips it, the whole container goes." "Can you disarm it?" the team leader demanded. "I can try, but this tech isn't standard cartel work. Someone outside their usual network built this." The words hung heavy. The implication was chilling. Perhaps another organization was involved. Maybe this operation wasn't just about smuggling. Up above, the freighter lurched again as the boarding team in the engine room successfully cut power to one of the main drives. The vessel's speed dropped, but not enough to stop its momentum entirely. The cartel boats were now visible on the horizon, their navigation lights blinking faintly through the darkness. The helicopter fired warning flares, trying to scatter their formation, but the cartel boats tightened up and increased speed. They were clearly trained for coordinated maritime combat. Inside the cargo hold, the specialist found something unexpected, a secondary panel beneath the biometric lock, shielded, almost hidden. He carefully pried it open and saw a complex mesh of wires leading to what looked like a data module, not just an explosive. The timer wasn't merely for detonation. It was also counting down to a data purge. Whatever was inside the container wasn't just physical cargo. It carried information. As the timer slipped under the 3-minute mark, the tactical team received an urgent update from the helicopter. The cartel reinforcements were splitting into 2 groups, one heading for the freighter, the other flanking the Coast Guard cutter to cut off support. The cutter's deck guns rotated toward the incoming boats. Over the radio, the captain's voice came through with steely calm. "Boarding team, you're out of time. Finish what you started. We'll hold the line." The night erupted into action. Searchlights cut through smoke and seawater. Engines roared. Gunfire cracked across the waves. The freighter trembled under the weight of converging forces. And in the dim cargo hold, the red digits on the timer ticked relentlessly toward 0. 2 minutes, 45 seconds. The digits pulsed like a heartbeat in the darkness of the cargo hold. The explosive specialist's hands moved with surgical precision, tracing each wire, isolating circuits, and scanning for hidden triggers. The tension inside the compartment was suffocating. Every sound, the distant gunfire, the engine groans, the shouts echoing from the deck, felt amplified in the confined space. The team leader kept his focus on the narrow hallway leading into the hold. Reinforcement boats were closing in fast, and if the Coast Guard's perimeter didn't hold, cartel fighters could breach the freighter from the outside at any moment. Above deck, the situation had transformed into a full-scale maritime battle. The cutter opened fire with precision bursts, aiming to disable the approaching cartel boats rather than sink them outright. One boat took a direct hit to its engine, spinning violently before slowing to a halt. But the others kept coming, undeterred, weaving through the barrage with practiced maneuvers. The helicopter strafed low, its spotlight sweeping across the waves as the pilot coordinated interception tactics with the cutter's bridge. Inside the freighter's engine room, the 2nd Coast Guard unit was working frantically to shut down the remaining drives. The engineer reported that the freighter's control systems had been partially overridden. An automated script was fighting their manual inputs, trying to bring the engines back online. Whoever had set up this vessel wasn't relying on crew. It was remotely controlled to run even in the absence of human operators. The sonar operator aboard the cutter shouted a new warning: additional contacts inbound, larger signatures. The screen lit up with 3 new pings far beyond the reinforcements. Their size suggested bigger vessels, possibly motherships or armed trawlers. The cartel wasn't just extracting, they were deploying a layered defense. 1 minute, 50 seconds. The explosives specialist peeled back the secondary panel completely, exposing the data module. It was unlike anything he'd seen on cartel shipments before, compact, encrypted, and tied into the detonation circuit. If the timer reached 0, the explosives would trigger, and the module's data would self-destruct simultaneously. "This is military grade," he whispered. "Not homemade. Someone outside the cartel built this system." The team leader's radio crackled, urgent voices from the cutter. "Boarding team, brace. Hostiles attempting to board from the port side." The team stationed near the deck responded immediately, rushing to repel the boarders. Grappling hooks clanged against the hull as cartel fighters tried to climb up under the cover of smoke grenades. The Coast Guard officers met them at the railings, engaging in close-quarters combat on the pitching deck. Muzzle flashes lit the night, briefly revealing faces obscured by balaclavas. 1 minute. The specialist connected his diagnostic device to the data module. The encrypted interface lit up with cascading symbols. "I can't disarm this conventionally," he muttered. "The detonation and data purge are fused. I either bypass the encryption entirely or pull the wrong wire and set it off." The team leader didn't hesitate. "Then bypass it." He began manually overriding the circuit, sweat dripping down his temple despite the cold night air. Above them, the helicopter broke off from its position to intercept 2 cartel boats attempting to flank the freighter's starboard side. Tracer fire streaked across the water as the cutter maneuvered to close gaps in the perimeter. 30 seconds. The specialist's tools clicked in rapid succession. He forced a manual interrupt command into the circuit. A single red light on the panel switched to amber, but the countdown didn't stop. Instead, the numbers accelerated slightly, a built-in failsafe. "Damn it," he hissed. "It's adaptive. Someone's watching this remotely." That realization sent a ripple of unease through the team. If an outside operator was observing and adjusting the system in real time, they were up against more than just a smuggling ring. They were inside a live operation. 20 seconds. Gunfire intensified outside. One of the cartel reinforcement boats managed to get close enough to launch a volley of small arms fire at the freighter. Bullets ricocheted off the hull as the cutter returned fire. On deck, 2 Coast Guard officers held the line at the railing, preventing a full breach by sheer force. 10 seconds. The specialist took a deep breath, isolated 2 wires, one black, one green, and made his call. He cut the black wire. The timer froze at 0:09, the red light blinking steadily. For a moment, everything seemed to pause. Then the panel changed. The countdown disappeared, replaced by a simple message on the screen: "Manual override detected. Protocol be initiated." The amber light turned blue. Somewhere deep in the freighter's structure, machinery whirred to life, heavy, mechanical, deliberate. It wasn't an explosion. It was something else. The sonar team picked it up first. "New contact beneath the freighter," the operator said slowly. "Something's detaching." A massive metallic object was separating from the freighter's underside. It wasn't debris. It had shape, structure, and its own propulsion signature. The specialists stared at the panel in disbelief. They hid something inside the hull. And outside, beneath the crashing waves, that hidden object began to move. The hidden object slid free from the freighter's underside with eerie smoothness, its metallic surface glinting faintly under the scattered searchlights and helicopter beam. At first, it looked like a submerged container being released. But as it cleared the hull, its shape became unmistakable, a sleek, compact submersible. It wasn't a crude, cartel-made vessel. This was engineered with precision. Its low radar profile, tapered nose, and quiet propulsion suggested advanced technology, something built to travel long distances underwater, undetected. "Command, this is boarding team," the team leader radioed sharply. "We have a submersible detaching. Repeat, a submersible is active and moving away from the freighter." The sonar operator aboard the cutter confirmed immediately. "We've got it. It's fast, descending and accelerating. If it clears the perimeter, we'll lose it." The Coast Guard captain made a snap decision. "Deploy pursuit drones. Keep the net tight. We cannot let that sub escape." Small autonomous underwater drones launched from the cutter's stern, slipping beneath the surface with a soft hiss. Their sonar pings echoed faintly through the water as they began tracking the sub's trajectory. Meanwhile, the helicopter pilot repositioned to provide overwatch, though the sub was already too deep for visual contact. On the freighter, chaos intensified. Cartel fighters were pushing harder on both sides. The cutter's gunners rotated to cover multiple directions, suppressing the reinforcements, but the cartel boats were fighting with desperation, knowing their true asset was slipping away below. In the engine room, the Coast Guard unit managed to shut down the last of the freighter's propulsion systems completely. The massive ship shuddered, finally losing all forward momentum. But the damage was done. The submersible had already gained distance. Back in the cargo hold, the explosives specialist stared at the now blue panel. The Protocol B initiated message pulsed softly, then changed again, transmission link active. "They're sending data," he realized. "Whatever was stored in this container, they're transmitting it to the sub before it gets away." He yanked open another layer of the module, revealing a high-frequency antenna embedded inside. It was transmitting through encrypted bursts, short, dense packets of data designed to evade easy interception. The team leader switched channels. "Command, they're exfiltrating data through the sub. We need electronic interception now." The cutter's communications officers scrambled. Specialized equipment was brought online to jam the frequency, but the cartel's signal was slippery, hopping between bands with military-grade encryption. Each second they failed to block, it was a second closer to a successful handoff. Underwater, the submersible began a sharp dive, heading toward deeper waters. The pursuit drones followed, but their operational range was limited. If the sub reached a certain depth and distance, tracking would become exponentially harder. On the surface, the cartel reinforcement boats suddenly shifted tactics. Instead of pressing their attack on the freighter, two of them broke formation and positioned themselves in the exact escape corridor the sub was heading toward, effectively shielding it from underwater interception lines. "Smart," the captain muttered. "They're covering the sub's exit like a convoy." He gave the order for the cutter to accelerate and cut across their formation. The deck guns roared again, forcing the cartel boats into evasive maneuvers. Explosions of water shot up as rounds struck near their hulls. But the cartel pilots were skilled, weaving in tight arcs to keep the Coast Guard occupied while buying the sub more time. Meanwhile, deep inside the freighter's lower deck, the boarding team followed the sound of the whirring machinery to a hidden compartment. They discovered a reinforced hatch leading to a launch bay, clearly where the sub had been hidden. The walls were lined with modular racks, some empty, others holding unfamiliar crates marked only with encrypted codes. This was no ordinary smuggling vessel. It was a mobile hub, part warehouse, part launch platform. Suddenly, the helicopter pilot's voice cut through the comms. "Command, sonars picking up secondary propulsion signatures from the sub. It just accelerated again, deeper and faster. If it hits that trench ahead, it'll vanish. The captain's response was immediate. Authorize interception package. We're not losing it. Beneath the surface, 2 high-speed interceptor torpedoes launched from the cutter, not to destroy, but to shadow and disable. Their onboard guidance systems locked onto the sub's acoustic signature. Back on the freighter, the explosive specialist shouted from the cargo hold, "They're almost done transmitting. I need more power to break this encryption or it's gone." The team leader radioed urgently. "Command, can we boost jamming power?" "Negative," came the reply. "We're already at safe output. Any higher, we risk frying our own systems." The seconds were bleeding away. The sub was racing into deep water, shielded by cartel boats, carrying something unknown, something valuable enough for this entire elaborate operation. And inside the cargo hold, the transmission indicator on the panel flashed rapidly, nearing completion. Then, through the static-filled comms, a new voice emerged, calm, composed, and distinctly not Cartel. It came through the same frequency as the data feed. "You're too late to understand what you've found." The voice cut off abruptly. And beneath the waves, the submersible disappeared off sonar. The sonar screens went blank in an instant, not a gradual fade, but a clean, deliberate cut. The submersible hadn't simply moved out of range, it had vanished. The sonar operator double-checked the systems, thinking it was a glitch. But the readings were clear. The sub had engaged some kind of countermeasure that severed its acoustic signature entirely. "Contact lost," the operator said slowly. "It's gone." The control room fell into a tense silence. Losing a cartel sub was one thing. Losing a vessel that sophisticated, carrying encrypted data and a hidden cargo, was another matter entirely. The captain clenched his jaw. "Deploy deep-scan buoys. Lock down this perimeter. Nobody leaves these waters without a search." On the freighter, the boarding team regrouped in the cargo hold. The explosive specialist stared at the transmission panel. The progress bar had reached its end. A final message flashed briefly on the screen, "Transfer complete." Then the module powered down on its own, the lights dying like a heartbeat fading into silence. "They got it out," he said grimly. "Whatever it was, it's in that sub now." The team leader scanned the room. And someone was watching us the entire time. Above deck, the fight was still raging. The cartel reinforcement boats were now in full retreat mode, splitting off in different directions to stretch the Coast Guard thin. The helicopter pursued one group, while the cutter engaged another. But it was clear these boats weren't trying to win anymore. They were trying to buy time and scatter, making it impossible to track which one might be linked to the sub's escape plan. One of the cartel boats suddenly exploded into flames, not from Coast Guard fire, but from within. The blast was precise, controlled, like a self-destruct. Debris scattered across the water. The other boats didn't stop to help. They maintained their evasive course, vanishing into the night. "Why would they blow their own boat?" one officer muttered. "Covering tracks," the captain replied. "They don't leave evidence floating." Back inside the freighter, the boarding team moved deeper through the hidden compartments. What they uncovered was even stranger. Schematics, equipment crates, and modular parts that didn't resemble standard smuggling tools. Some crates contained dismantled drone components. Others held encrypted communication hubs identical to those used by state actors. There were no cartel markings anywhere, just serial numbers that had been meticulously filed off. "This isn't a cartel operation anymore," the team leader whispered. "This is something else using the cartel as cover." Meanwhile, underwater, the interceptor drones reached the trench where the sub had vanished. They slowed their pursuit, scanning the dark abyss. The sonar buoys deployed by the cutter began to pick up faint anomalies, not a single signature, but multiple fragmented echoes, like decoys. The sub had deployed something to mask its trail, scattering false signals in every direction. The captain knew this was slipping out of standard operational scope. "Get me Federal Command," he ordered. "This is turning into something bigger than a drug bust." Back on the freighter, the specialist managed to extract the data module from the container. Though most of the information had been transmitted, a fragment of the encrypted memory remained. It wasn't much, but it was something. He sealed it in a hardened case for immediate transport. Just as the team prepared to return topside, a dull metallic thunk echoed from deep within the freighter's lower decks. It wasn't the sound of machinery. It was deliberate, rhythmic. 3 knocks. Then silence. The team leader raised his hand, signaling the others to freeze. The sound came again, faint but unmistakable. It was coming from behind a reinforced bulkhead they hadn't breached yet. "Someone's down there," one officer whispered. They moved cautiously toward the source. The bulkhead was locked with a heavy manual wheel. 2 officers turned it slowly, metal grinding as the seal broke. The door opened into a narrow, dimly lit compartment. Inside, sitting against the wall with wrists bound and a hood over his head, was a man, alive. His clothes were soaked, his breathing shallow but steady. From the looks of it, he wasn't Cartel. His boots, his jacket, the faint outline of a sidearm holster, everything about him screamed professional. The team leader knelt, pulling the hood off. The man blinked against the light, his face bruised but his eyes sharp. He looked at the Coast Guard officer and spoke with a calm, measured voice. "You have no idea what you've stepped into." The captain's voice crackled over the radio. "Boarding team, status?" The team leader stared at the man. "We've found a detainee. He's not Cartel." And as the cutter's deep scan buoys kept pinging in the dark trench with no solid hit, somewhere far below the surface, that submersible kept moving, silent, invisible, carrying with it the data and the real reason this entire operation had been set in motion. The detainee's eyes followed every movement in the compartment, cold and calculating. He didn't look terrified like a captured smuggler. He looked like someone who had been waiting for this moment. The team leader motioned for 2 officers to secure him, but before they could lift him, the man spoke again, his voice firm. "Listen carefully. You're running out of time. If you don't seal this ship and lock down your perimeter right now, you're going to lose more than that sub." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. "Who are you?" the team leader demanded. The man didn't answer directly. Instead, he nodded toward the ceiling, where the faint hum of the ship's auxiliary systems was still running. "They left a trigger. Probably in the engine compartment. This vessel isn't meant to be recovered. It's meant to disappear." "Captain, we might have a sabotage situation," the team leader radioed. The captain's reply came instantly, tension thick in his voice. "Confirm and neutralize. We can't afford to lose the evidence." The specialist and 2 engineers sprinted toward the engine deck. As they descended the narrow ladderways, the hum grew louder. The deeper they went, the hotter the air became. It wasn't just machinery running. Something was drawing massive power. When they reached the compartment, the truth became clear. A compact but highly advanced device had been rigged near the primary fuel lines. It wasn't a standard explosive. It was a shaped thermite charge, designed to burn through the hull and scuttle the ship in minutes without creating a massive external blast. Once ignited, it would melt through steel like wax. "Whoever set this up knew exactly what they were doing," the specialist muttered. "This isn't Cartel handiwork." Above deck, the detainee stood now, still restrained but eerily composed. The team leader tried again. "Who are you working for?" He gave a thin smile. "Let's just say, the people you think you're chasing aren't the ones pulling the strings." Meanwhile, the sonar team reported faint intermittent echoes from the trench. "We've got something," the operator said. "It's faint, but it's moving toward the shelf edge. If it reaches deep water, we'll lose it permanently." The captain made a quick decision. "Deploy the secondary drone swarm. All units, tighten the net." Back in the engine room, the thermite charge suddenly emitted a rising, high-pitched tone. The timer had activated. A red indicator blinked to life. "It's live!" one of the engineers shouted. The specialist moved in immediately, pulling off the panel. The device was intricate, no obvious wires to cut, no standard disarm sequence. Whoever had armed it had done so manually, leaving no electronic interface. It was old-school sabotage, the kind designed to resist remote countermeasures. "Captain," the specialist said through gritted teeth, "we have less than 4 minutes before this thing melts through the hull. If it goes, the entire cargo hold and whatever's left of the intel goes to the bottom." The captain's reply was sharp. "You have 3. Work fast." Upstairs, the detainee watched the commotion with unsettling calm, almost as if he knew the clock was ticking. The team leader stepped closer. "Tell me how to disarm it." "Now." The man tilted his head. "I'll tell you, but only if I speak to your federal command directly." "This isn't a negotiation," the officer snapped. The detainee leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Then you'd better start preparing evacuation protocols. Because without me, this ship is gone." Down below, the specialist's hands moved fast, sweat dripping as he worked. The device wasn't just meant to destroy, it was layered with fail-safes. One wrong move, and the thermite would trigger instantly. Meanwhile, sonar alarms began to flare again. The sub had resurfaced briefly at the edge of the trench, just long enough to launch something. A small object detached from its hull and began heading back toward the Coast Guard cutter at alarming speed. "Unidentified underwater contact inbound," the sonar operator called out. "It's not the sub, it's a separate device." The captain froze for half a second, then barked, "Defensive posture. Intercept that contact now." The chase below and the sabotage aboard were now unfolding simultaneously, 2 ticking clocks counting down at once. And somewhere between the surface and the abyss, the true scale of the operation was beginning to show itself. The unidentified contact sliced through the black water like a torpedo. Alarms blared across the cutter as the Combat Information Center switched to full alert. Red lights washed over the room. "Contact closing at 45 knots and accelerating," the sonar operator yelled. "Estimated impact in 2 minutes." "Deploy countermeasures," the captain barked. The crew launched acoustic decoys into the water, devices designed to lure incoming threats off course by emitting confusing noise patterns. 2 decoys dropped into the sea with a loud splash, sinking fast and activating. A chorus of mechanical pings echoed through the dark. For a tense moment, the incoming contact seemed to hesitate. The sonar trace wavered, like it was recalibrating. Then, without warning, it bypassed the decoys entirely and adjusted its vector, heading straight for the cutter. "It's locked onto the ship itself," the sonar operator muttered. "This isn't a standard torpedo, it's something smarter." On board the freighter, the specialist worked frantically over the thermite device. His gloves were slick with sweat as he used a fiber optic probe to trace the primer path. "It's triple-lined," he whispered. "If I cut one wrong conductor, the backup circuit completes automatically." "How much time?" came the captain's voice over comms. 2 minutes, maybe less." Up on deck, the detainee remained eerily composed. The team leader glared at him. "If that device hits, everyone goes down, including you." The man smirked faintly. "It's not designed to destroy your ship. It's designed to disable it, to keep you from chasing what's coming next." "What's coming next?" the officer demanded. The detainee's eyes shifted toward the horizon. "You'll find out when it's too late." Meanwhile, 2 interceptor drones in the water broke formation to meet the incoming contact head-on. Their onboard AI locked onto the target, maneuvering aggressively to box it in. The drone pilots watched their feeds in silence. The object didn't evade like a typical torpedo. It responded tactically, almost intelligently, shifting its depth and angle in real time. "Impact in 60 seconds," someone shouted. Below decks, the specialist finally spotted it, the pressure trigger nested between the thermite blocks. "There you are," he muttered. He steadied his hands and began slowly unscrewing the locking pin. One wrong twitch, and the entire device would ignite. 30 seconds. The first interceptor drone rammed the contact. A dull thud reverberated through the sonar feeds, but instead of detonating, the object latched onto the drone's hull like a parasite. Then it used the drone's momentum to slingshot itself closer to the cutter. "It's adapting." The captain's face hardened. "If it reaches the hull, cut it loose manually. Prepare divers if necessary." 15 seconds. In the engine room, the specialist yanked the final pin free and pulled the trigger housing out in one clean motion. The red light on the device flickered, then went dark. He exhaled shakily. Thermite neutralized. Before anyone could celebrate, a violent shudder tore through the cutter. The inbound object struck the hull, not explosively, but magnetically, attaching itself beneath the waterline. External cameras showed it glowing faintly, like a powered device booting up. "Something's attached to us," the sonar operator reported. "It's active but not detonating." The detainee lifted his head. "Now," he said calmly, "we're at the real beginning." The captain stared at the monitor. The device under the hull wasn't a bomb, it was a relay. Data streams began spiking across their secure channels, encrypted packets flooding their network from the hull attachment. Someone, somewhere, was piggybacking on their systems, using the cutter itself as a node. "Kill all external links," the communications officer shouted. "They're trying to breach our network." "Cutting now," another replied. But the data surge didn't stop, it accelerated. Back inside the freighter, the detainee's comm cracked just enough to show something else: urgency. "You're already too late," he said quietly. "The sub wasn't the prize. You were." Above them, in the dark water beyond the trench, the Cartel sub continued to move toward deep water, completely silent. But for the first time since the chase began, a second sonar signature appeared on the outer edge of the grid, massive, slow, and deliberate. It wasn't Cartel. It wasn't Coast Guard. It was something else. And it was moving closer. The sonar operator leaned closer to his screen, brow furrowing. "Captain, I'm picking up a new contact. Large displacement. Rough estimate, over 4,000 tons. The captain's head snapped around. "What?" "There's nothing scheduled in this sector. It's not broadcasting any AIS. No transponder, no ID. It's just there. Range 17 nautical miles and closing. Speed 8 knots. Depth periscope level." That sent a chill through the entire command deck. Whatever was out there wasn't a Cartel fishing boat. It was something far more deliberate. "Patch sonar feed to main display," the captain ordered. The large signature appeared on the tactical map, smooth, steady, and unervingly controlled. The detainee, still restrained in the cargo hold, tilted his head and gave a quiet laugh. "You finally found the real player." The team leader spun toward him. "What is that?" But the man didn't answer. His silence said enough. Meanwhile, the relay device clamped to the cutter's hull was still transmitting. The cyber team worked furiously to isolate it from internal systems, but the breach was sophisticated. It wasn't just siphoning data, it was rewriting packet headers, bouncing encrypted bursts through satellite uplinks faster than they could shut them down. "This thing is tunneling through our defense layers," the communications officer said, panic rising in his voice. "It's probing our secure comms. If it gets into the encrypted net, then every frequency we use will be compromised, the captain finished grimly. Shut down everything that's not hardwired. I want this ship electronically dark. Lights flickered as external systems went offline. Radios cut to static. Screens froze mid-transmission. The cutter went silent, isolated in the dark sea like a lone fortress under siege. On the sonar display, the large contact changed course. It was now moving directly toward the cutter. In the engine room, divers prepared to deploy. The plan was simple but dangerous. Detach the relay manually before it could complete whatever it was doing. 2 elite divers checked their gear, ready to plunge into the black water beneath the ship. "You've got one shot," the dive commander said through comms. "If that thing's rigged with anti-tamper, we may not get a second chance." As the divers slipped into the water, the sea swallowed them completely. Their helmet lights cut narrow cones through the darkness. The relay device came into view, a sleek metallic capsule anchored magnetically, emitting a faint pulsing light. "It's military grade," one diver breathed. "Not cartel tech. This thing's got a layered shell." Back on deck, the detainees suddenly straightened. "If they're touching that device," he warned, "they'd better be fast." "What happens if they're not?" the team leader demanded. The man's eyes narrowed. "It calls for help." Almost on cue, the massive sonar contact accelerated. From 8 knots to 15, then 20. The low hum of its engines began resonating faintly through the cutter's hull. "It's picking up speed," the sonar operator said. "Closing fast, 12 nautical miles." "Identify it now," the captain snapped. "We're trying, sir, but it's clean. No cavitation noise, no propeller signature. It's almost like a modern attack sub, but quieter." Underwater, one diver pried at the device's magnetic clamps with a hydraulic spreader while the other scanned its surface. "There's no manual release," he muttered. "They don't want this coming off." 2 minutes until contact reaches interception range, sonar reported. Then, through the murky water, the divers heard something, a deep, rhythmic thrum, growing louder. They turned, and for a split second, a massive shadow passed beyond the range of their lights. It was moving fast. "Something's down here with us," one diver whispered. On the bridge, the captain watched the sonar trace split into 2 distinct signatures, the main vessel and a smaller fast-moving one breaking off ahead of it. "Launch boats and bring the boarding team back now," the captain ordered. "Everyone prepares for potential hostile engagement." The detainee finally looked up with something resembling sincerity in his eyes. "You don't understand. This isn't a cartel convoy. This is a delivery, and you're standing between them and the handoff." The captain locked eyes with him. "Then who are they delivering to?" But before the detainee could answer, the sonar operator's voice cracked through the silence, tight and urgent. "Contact just launched something else. Multiple objects in the water. They're surrounding us." On the tactical display, tiny pings began to bloom all around the cutter like a spreading net. Whatever was coming had just arrived. The sonar room fell into a tense electric silence as more pings appeared, one after another, until the tactical display looked like a tightening ring of lights around the cutter. The operator's hands hovered over the controls, his voice low but steady. "They're not torpedoes. Too slow. These are autonomous. Possibly drones. Dozens of them. Forming a perimeter," the captain murmured, his eyes narrowing at the screen. "They're boxing us in." Outside, the divers hovered beneath the hull, frozen as the faint silhouettes of the small objects began to glide through the water around them. Each drone was barely the size of a torpedo, sleek and quiet, moving with eerie coordination. Their lights were off, but their movements were perfectly synchronized, like a school of predators circling prey. "Command, we've got multiple unknowns underwater." "They're moving in formation," one diver whispered. "Abort detachment. Return to deck now," came the order. "Negative. If we leave this device, we're compromised anyway," the diver shot back. His gloved hands tightened on the spreader. With a final surge, he broke one of the magnetic clamps loose. Metal screeched underwater. The moment the clamp snapped free, the drones reacted. The sonar display flared as their formation tightened. Several peeled off toward the cutter's hull. Contact inbound. The captain slammed his fist down. "Raise defensive nets. Get those divers out of the water." The emergency nets deployed with a deep splash, surrounding the cutter like a steel curtain. But the drones didn't attack the hull directly. They fanned out and began scanning the net's perimeter as if analyzing weak points. Back on the freighter, the detainee's composure finally cracked. He strained against his restraints and shouted toward the officers, "You need to move this ship out of here now. This isn't a containment net, it's a transmission ring." The team leader spun toward him. "Transmission of what?" But the man's eyes were fixed on the water. "They're not here to fight you. They're here to finish the upload." On the cutter's bridge, the comms officer stared at a terminal still in isolated mode. "Sir, even with all external links severed, I'm seeing background signal spikes. They're bouncing something off the relay device using sonar frequencies." "Sonar?" the captain repeated. "Yes. They're using the ocean itself as the transmission medium. Low-frequency bursts, modulated. They're turning the water into a data line." The realization hit like a wave. The drones weren't weapons. They were amplifiers. Each one formed part of a massive, encrypted underwater network. And the cutter, with the relay clamped to its hull, was the final node in that chain. "Get that device off now," the captain barked. Under the water, the divers worked with brutal efficiency. The second clamp was nearly off when one of the drones approached within arm's length. It stopped, rotated slightly, and a panel on its side opened to reveal a blinking light. Command? One of them is looking at us. Finish the job and move." The last clamp snapped. The device drifted free of the hull, just for a heartbeat. Then, almost instantly, 3 drones surged forward and caught it mid-sink, locking it into their formation like a prized object. Then, in perfect unison, the entire swarm began descending into the dark. "They're taking it," the sonar operator breathed. "They're retreating with the relay." "Not retreating," the detainee muttered. "Delivering." And then everything changed. The massive contact on sonar, the one that had been closing in, suddenly stopped dead in the water. For several seconds it held its position, silent. Then a deep, resonant pulse rolled through the sea, so low and powerful it made every metal surface on the cutter vibrate. "Jesus!" one officer whispered. "What was that?" The detainee lowered his head. "Handshake signal. They're opening the channel." The swarm dove deeper, vanishing off sonar one by one as they moved toward the trench. The large vessel's signature slowly began to shift position, aligning itself directly beneath the swarm's trajectory. "Captain," the sonar operator said, his voice barely above a whisper, "they're not after us. We're standing in the middle of a live network. And whatever that big contact is, it's the hub." The captain's jaw tightened. "Not on my watch." But just as he spoke, something unexpected happened. The freighter, the cartel ship they had boarded, lit up. Its previously dead navigation lights flickered to life, and deep inside its hull, a buried system began to broadcast. The detainee looked up sharply. No, that wasn't supposed to activate yet. And then, from somewhere deep inside the freighter, a mechanical sequence began to hum, steady, rising. Not explosives this time. Something else. Something about to change everything. The hum from inside the freighter grew louder, steady at first, then building into a deep mechanical roar that reverberated through the steel decks. The boarding team turned their flashlights toward the source. Bulkheads vibrated. Pipes rattled. Somewhere below the cargo hold, an automated system had come online. "Captain, the freighter's waking up," the team leader radioed. "Engine compartments sealed. We can't access it from here. Power's being rerouted through buried conduits. It's not coming from the main generator." On the cutter's bridge, the captain's eyes darted between displays. "You're telling me that ship is activating itself?" "That's exactly what it looks like, sir." Meanwhile, sonar was painting an even more disturbing picture. The swarm of underwater drones had reached the trench. One by one, their signatures faded, not like they were shutting down, but like they were entering some kind of transmission tunnel. The massive contact held position, pulsing at regular intervals. "It's acting like a server," the sonar operator said quietly. "Each pulse is a data beacon. The swarm's feeding something to it in structured packets. Sir, we're watching a live data drop." Below decks, the detainee's mask of control was cracking. "You have no idea what's about to happen," he said through clenched teeth. "That freighter isn't just a transport. It's the trigger mechanism for the handoff." The team leader stepped closer. "Then start talking. What's the target?" But the man's gaze shifted toward the bulkhead as the humming reached a new pitch. "Too late," he whispered. Suddenly, the freighter's entire lighting system flashed white. Deck alarms began to scream. The mechanical hum shifted into a rhythmic pulse that synchronized perfectly with the sonar beacons coming from the trench. "They're sinking," the communications officer realized. "The freighter's acting as a surface transmitter. It's bridging the underwater network with something above." "Above where?" the captain demanded. The answer came seconds later. A radar operator shouted from across the room. "Multiple high-altitude contacts, bearing 320. They just appeared out of nowhere. No transponder, no signature. Speed Mach 2 and climbing." The captain froze. "Aircraft?" "Not conventional, sir. Trajectories are too steep. They're ascending, not descending." On the freighter, the boarding team forced open a hatch to the lower compartment. What they saw made no sense. In the middle of the hold, hidden beneath layers of false flooring, a cylindrical structure was rising from the deck, sleek, metallic, and humming with power. Around its base, dozens of cables fed into it from every direction. "It's not a bomb," the specialist whispered. "It's a transmitter. High energy, probably directed beam." As the cylinder locked into place, a surge of energy rippled outward. The boarding team's comms crackled, scrambled by interference. "Captain, it's emitting something, broad spectrum. We can't stay down here for long." Back on the cutter, systems began to flicker again despite being in isolation mode. Static bled into the internal comm lines. The radar feeds briefly froze. "They're punching through our electronic blackout," the communications officer shouted. "The freighter's become a relay tower. It's linking the underwater network to something in the upper atmosphere." The detainee finally spoke, his tone different, almost resigned. "You're not chasing a drug cartel. You've intercepted a data corridor. That ship, that swarm, that sub, they're just pieces of a much bigger network. And right now, you're standing in the middle of a live operation they've been preparing for months." The captain turned sharply toward him. "Who's behind it?" The detainee exhaled slowly. "If I tell you, you won't believe me." The radar operator's voice cut through the tense air. "Sir, those high-altitude contacts just hit the stratosphere. Their telemetry matches satellites. They're not planes, they're launching." A chill ran through the entire control room. The sonar operator added, "And the large underwater contact is starting to move again. Heading deeper. Way deeper. On the freighter, the cylinder reached full power. A blinding column of blue-white energy shot upward through a hidden hatch on the deck, piercing the night sky like a vertical beam. Sensors on the cutter immediately detected a burst of encrypted transmissions, thousands of packets per second, shooting straight into orbit. "They're uplinking," the communications officer whispered. "Whatever they pulled from that relay, it's going up now." The captain slammed his hand on the console. "Boarding team, disable that transmitter now." "We're on it," the team leader shouted. Sparks flew as they planted breaching charges around the cylinder's base. But the structure was reinforced far beyond anything expected on a cartel ship. It was built to survive. The detainee looked at the captain and said quietly, "You can't stop the upload. All you can do is decide what happens when they finish." And then, for the first time that night, the massive underwater contact responded, not with sonar pulses, but by rising. Slowly, steadily, it began ascending from the trench toward the surface, directly beneath the cutter. The sonar operator's voice cracked through the rising storm of alarms. "Captain, the large contact is ascending. Vertical trajectory. It's heading straight for us." Every eye snapped to the tactical display. The massive sonar signature was climbing steadily from the trench, deep, dark water giving way as something enormous approached the surface. The pulses it had been sending changed frequency, accelerating into a rapid staccato rhythm, like a machine waking up. "How fast?" the captain demanded. 20 knots and increasing. Depth, 800 meters. 600. It's coming fast. Bring engines online. Prepare to reposition, the captain ordered. But before the cutter could maneuver, the freighter's transmitter surged again, releasing another column of blinding energy into the sky. The radar feeds spasmed. Instruments went haywire. For a split second, every system on the cutter froze, screens blacked out, navigation failed, even emergency lights flickered. "They just hit us with an EMP surge through the water," the comms officer yelled. "Internal circuits overloaded. We're running blind." In the freighter's lower hold, the boarding team finished planting charges around the transmitter base. The team leader's voice cut through the static, explosives set. "But something's happening down here. There's a pressure build-up around the cylinder. I think it's pulling energy from the water itself." Back on the cutter, the sonar operator kept reporting in a voice that grew more strained with each passing second. "Depth 400 meters. 350, 300. Captain, whatever this is, it's huge. We're not talking about a sub. This is something else." The detainee stood completely still, his gaze fixed on the sea through a small porthole. He whispered almost to himself, "They brought the hub." "What hub?" the team leader snapped, gripping his vest. The man finally turned, eyes hard. "What you've been calling a contact isn't just a ship. It's a moving data core. A mobile platform. Think of it like a floating server farm, only far older and more advanced than anything you've seen. You've stumbled into an active corridor. And now the hub is surfacing to complete the transfer." Outside, the ocean began to tremble. A low, resonant rumble rolled beneath the cutter's hull, deep and primal. The divers, still near the ship, stopped moving as an immense shadow emerged below them. It wasn't sleek like a submarine. It was angular, layered, almost architectural. "Contact at 100 meters, sonar said. 50, 30. And then, with a colossal groan of displaced water, the structure broke the surface. A massive black shape rose from the depths, a platform the size of a destroyer but without any recognizable design. Its surface was covered in geometric panels that shifted like living machinery. Seawater cascaded off its sides as lights ignited across its hull in perfect sequence, locking onto the freighter's transmitter beam. "My God!" someone whispered on the bridge. The detainee didn't look surprised. "You're not dealing with smugglers anymore. You're standing on top of an active exchange node between sea and orbit. That thing isn't here to fight you. It's here to receive. As if on cue, the transmitter on the freighter began to modulate, changing frequency bands in sync with the platform's lights. The blue-white column above it shifted, narrowing into a single beam that connected the freighter, the platform, and the satellites above into a seamless line. "They're finishing the upload," the communications officer said, his voice thin. "We have minutes, maybe less, before it completes." "Detonate the charges," the captain ordered. "Negative," the team leader's voice cut through. "There's a countermeasure system around the cylinder. If we blow it prematurely, it could trigger a self-protection protocol. We need to manually breach the power core first." "Then do it," the captain barked. The boarding team scrambled. Sparks flew as they cut through reinforced plating at the base of the transmitter. Steam and electrical discharge filled the hold. The ship itself seemed to fight back. Bulkheads locked, emergency shutters slammed down, and deep mechanical clanks echoed through the freighter as if it were sealing itself against intrusion. On the cutter's bridge, sonar suddenly reported new contacts. Multiple small signatures, rising from the platform's underside. "They're moving toward us." "They're drones," the captain said. "Prepare defense batteries." But when the drones breached the surface, they didn't attack. Instead, they formed a ring around the cutter, just like underwater, emitting synchronized pulses that disrupted every attempt at targeting. "They're jamming us again," an officer growled. "We can't lock on." The detainee looked at the captain with unnerving calm. "You can't stop the transfer with brute force. If you want to shut it down, you'll have to cut the bridge between them, and that means severing the freighter entirely." The captain's face hardened. "You're suggesting we sink it." "I'm not suggesting," the man replied. "I'm telling you, it's the only way." The platform's lights intensified, and a low hum filled the air, vibrating the deck beneath their boots. Up in orbit, the ascending aircraft had settled into position. 3, maybe 4 satellites, forming a triangulated array aimed directly at their coordinates. On the freighter, the boarding team finally breached the power core housing. Inside, they found something that shouldn't have been there, an object the size of a refrigerator, humming with alien precision, covered in strange geometric etchings that pulsed with light. "This isn't cartel tech," the specialist said. "It's not even military. This looks engineered for something else entirely." And as he spoke, the object inside the core suddenly reacted. Its lights shifted, locking onto the boarding team. A deep, harmonic tone filled the compartment. "Captain," the team leader said slowly, "I think it knows we're here." And above them, the beam linking sea to sky grew narrower, brighter, faster. The transfer was entering its final stage. The tone inside the freighter deepened into a throbbing resonance that shook the metal plates under the team's boots. The air grew heavier, as if pressure itself was building from within the ship. Then, the lights on the alien core shifted to a blood-red hue, and the harmonic sound broke into pulses, measured, intelligent, almost like a response. "Something's changing down here," the team leader reported, his voice tight. "It's reacting to us. Like it recognizes interference." On the cutter, the captain's hands tightened around the railing as new telemetry scrolled chaotically across backup screens. "I need status on that core. How close are you to disabling it?" "Not close," came the reply. "This isn't standard tech. The structure around it is self-repairing. Every cut we make seals itself a few seconds later. It's like working against a living machine." Before anyone could respond, the freighter gave a deep metallic groan and shifted slightly, as though something inside it was expanding. Alarms flared across both vessels. "Captain, the hull's heating up," an engineer shouted. "Infrared sensors are showing thermal spikes. Sections of the ship are nearing critical." "Pull them out?" the XO asked. The captain's gaze locked on the freighter's position, then on the massive black platform now looming beside it like a monolith. No. If we leave now, that thing completes the upload and we lose control of whatever happens next. They stay. Meanwhile, the boarding team cut deeper. One of the techs suddenly stopped mid-motion, staring at the core. Guys, look at this. On the core's surface, symbols began to rearrange themselves in spiraling formations. What had once been static engravings now moved fluidly, like data streaming across a living circuit board. A single vertical line split down the center of the object, revealing a pulsing interior of pure white light. "It's opening," the team leader whispered. Back on the cutter, the detainee finally broke his silence. "That's the handshake protocol. The core has recognized the platform. Once the slit fully opens, the bridge will be permanent. After that, nothing you do will matter." "What happens when the bridge is permanent?" the XO demanded. The man's eyes flicked toward the platform. "Then they'll no longer need the ship, or you." Almost on cue, the water around the platform started to boil, not from heat, but from sheer energy displacement. The drones circling the cutter changed formation, tightening the ring. They began projecting faint, circular ripples on the surface of the ocean. "Those aren't weapons," a sensor officer muttered. "They're mapping." "No," the detainee corrected. "They're targeting." Inside the freighter, the core reached a new threshold. The slit expanded, and from within emerged a beam, not upward this time, but outward, sweeping across the interior like a scanning light. It passed over the boarding team, and their equipment screens immediately filled with incomprehensible symbols. Radios crackled with strange bursts of sound, like encrypted languages spoken too fast for the human ear. "Captain, our systems are being hijacked," the team leader barked. "Every encrypted line is being overridden by some kind of—" His voice cut out. "Team leader, do you copy?" the captain snapped. Only static answered. Then the lights on the freighter flickered and died completely. For one breathless moment, the vessel went dark against the boiling sea. And then, slowly, impossibly, lights began to turn back on, but not human ones. Rows of pale blue strips illuminated along the ship's sides, forming patterns that mirrored those on the platform. "They've integrated it," the comms officer whispered. "The freighter isn't just part of the transfer anymore. It's becoming part of them." The captain made his decision. "All hands, prepare to cut the freighter loose. If we can't disable that core, we'll isolate the entire vessel before the bridge locks in. Interceptors, move in position for a controlled detonation sequence." But even as he gave the order, the ocean itself began to respond. Massive swells formed around the platform and freighter, not from weather, but from synchronized movements below. Sonar picked up multiple deep-water contacts, large, slow, and moving upward in perfect unison. The detainee's face went pale. "They've activated the Sentinels." "What are the Sentinels?" He turned to the captain, his voice flat. "The guardians of the hub. You're about to find out why no one interferes with a bridge twice." And then the sonar operator's voice cracked through the storm of noise. "Multiple contacts closing fast. Depth 200 meters. 150, 100. Captain, they're right below us." The cutter began to shake. Something massive was rising from the deep. And this time, it wasn't a single structure. It was many. The water beneath the cutter darkened into a black vortex as the sonar alarms screamed. The display filled with a cluster of signatures, not random, but positioned in a deliberate circular formation, surrounding both the freighter and the Coast Guard vessel. Each contact was huge, the smallest rivaling a nuclear submarine in size, the largest beyond the system's classification range. The ocean surface began to heave unnaturally. Waves no longer followed the rhythm of wind or tide. They responded to something mechanical moving beneath. The cutter's deck tilted as the crew struggled to stabilize equipment, their headsets flooded with overlapping alerts. Depth 70 meters and closing. Captain, they're positioning themselves underneath us, sonar reported, voice cracking with disbelief. Through the starboard viewport, faint glimmers appeared in the water, circular rows of pale blue lights spiraling upward in coordinated patterns, like underwater cities awakening in unison. Then, with a deep, bone-shaking rumble, the first sentinel broke the surface. It wasn't a submarine. It wasn't a ship. It was something else. The structure rose slowly, towering above the cutter. Its outer shell was smooth, black, and geometric, not built in the way human vessels are, but grown with precision. Water poured off tiered plates that rearranged themselves as it emerged, locking into configurations like pieces of a vast, intelligent puzzle. Rows of hexagonal panels opened along its sides, revealing interior channels that emitted a steady, pulsating glow. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered. "What is that?" No one answered. Moments later, a second sentinel breached the water to the port side. Then a third directly behind. Within minutes, 5 of them had formed a ring around the freighter and the cutter, their towering hulls rising like black spires in the night. Their positions matched the pattern of the drones on the surface exactly, completing a formation that looked deliberate. The platform at the center responded. Its lights pulsed in harmony with the sentinels, and the energy column from the freighter narrowed even further. On the bridge, comms flooded with interference so intense it cracked like static in their ears. The navigation systems dimmed as if an unseen hand was suppressing every electrical impulse. "They're locking us in," the XO said, watching the displays vanish one by one. Inside the freighter, the boarding team moved cautiously through the now eerily lit corridors. The core chamber had changed. The walls were no longer metal, at least not in any conventional sense. Smooth, black surfaces had spread outward from the core, replacing steel bulkheads with seamless geometric panels. The light from the core's slit filled the room like a living thing, scanning, probing, expanding. One of the techs pressed his hand against the wall. It was warm and pulsing. "Captain," the team leader whispered through the partially restored line, "the ship, it's transforming. We need to move now before we get sealed in." "Negative," came the captain's voice. "We're surrounded. If you leave without cutting that core, the bridge completes and whatever they're transferring goes live. Find a way. You're our only shot." The team leader glanced at the object, now fully awake, and exhaled through clenched teeth. "Roger that. We'll find a way." On the cutter's deck, crew members stared as the sentinels began to emit low-frequency pulses. The vibrations carried through the metal hull, rattling teeth, making bones hum. Some crew members clutched their ears. Others froze in place, overwhelmed by the resonance. "What's happening?" the XO shouted over the noise. The detainee, calm but grim, stepped forward. "They're synchronizing frequencies. They're bringing the hub fully online. Once the resonance locks, your vessel becomes part of the network whether you like it or not." "Meaning, you stop being observers. You become nodes." The captain turned sharply toward him. "Tell me how to stop it." The detainee hesitated. "There is one way. Sever the resonance manually. You'd have to disrupt the pattern from inside the core chamber itself. But if you do it wrong, the sentinels will react. And they don't give second warnings." The platform's lights suddenly intensified, flooding the ocean with blinding blue-white radiance. In orbit, the triangulated satellite array shifted alignment, focusing their beams downward with surgical precision. A massive hum built in the air, like the sky itself was charging. Inside the freighter, the core emitted a new tone, sharper, higher, almost like a countdown. The boarding team understood instantly. Whatever this bridge was, it was reaching its critical phase. "Captain," the team leader said, sweat dripping down his neck, "we're running out of time. The core's frequency is accelerating. We either shut this down in the next few minutes, or it finishes whatever it's doing." And above them, the 5 sentinels tilted slightly inward, their lights aligning with the central beam. For the first time, the night sky above the ocean seemed to bend, as if space itself was being pulled into a single point. The bridge was nearly complete. The sky above the formation warped like heat haze, except this distortion carried structure, layered rings of faint light spiraling outward from the central beam. The satellite array overhead locked into perfect alignment, forming a triangular lattice that pulsed in time with the platform and sentinels below. On the cutter's bridge, static flooded every remaining comm channel. The last flickers of functional screens displayed cascading lines of code that no one on board recognized, strings of characters, symbols, and shifting geometric sequences that adapted faster than any human encryption could track. "They've taken full control of our communications suite," the comms officer said, his voice trembling. "Everything's routing through them now. We're broadcasting, but not in any language I know." "Kill the transmitters," the captain snapped. "We can't," the officer replied, pale. "It's overriding the shutdown commands before they even execute." Outside, the sentinels began to emit overlapping beams that converged onto the freighter's hull. These beams weren't visible like the central column. They shimmered faintly, like heat mirages, bending the air around them. Where they touched, the freighter's structure warped, reshaping itself into clean, alien geometry. Plates folded. Metal unspooled like fabric. Within seconds, sections of the vessel no longer resembled a ship at all, but extensions of something else entirely. Inside the core chamber, the boarding team stared as the walls sealed shut behind them. The corridor they had used was gone, erased, replaced by smooth black panels. "We're trapped," one of the techs whispered. "Then we finish this here," the team leader replied. "Cut through the core. I don't care what it's made of, find a weakness." They deployed thermic lances and shaped charges, focusing on the slit in the object's surface. The moment the first arc of cutting heat touched it, the core responded. The lights flared, and the harmonic tone became piercing. The entire freighter shuddered, as if alive. Back on the cutter, the detainee leaned against the console, unfazed by the chaos. "You've reached the point of no return," he said calmly. "Either they complete the bridge, or you destroy the freighter. There's nothing else left." The captain turned to him, eyes narrowed. "You said severing the resonance manually could work." "Yes," the detainee answered. "But only if you match their frequency from the inside and destabilize it precisely at the convergence point. One wrong modulation, and the sentinels will interpret it as an attack. You've seen what they do when provoked." "How do they respond?" the XO asked. The detainee's answer was simple. "They erase." Outside, the water surged upward as the sentinels' beams intensified. The ocean around the formation flattened into an unnatural calm, like a sheet of glass under tension. Overhead, the lattice in the sky started to spin slowly, creating a vortex of light centered on the beam. "Captain," sonar called out, "all deep contacts are holding position in perfect symmetry. I've never seen anything like this. It's like they're preparing for something big." Inside the core chamber, one of the techs shouted, "We found something!" Along the slit's interior was a faint pulse, an irregularity, almost like a heartbeat out of sync with the others. The team leader crouched closer. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it wasn't part of the larger pattern. "That's the frequency divergence," the tech said. "If we can amplify a counterwave here, it might destabilize the resonance before it locks." "Then do it," the team leader ordered. They rerouted power from their suit systems to a makeshift pulse generator, aligning it with the irregular beat. As they tuned the device, the slit in the core reacted, warping slightly as if noticing the interference. The harmonic tone wavered. "Captain," the team leader reported, "we're about to inject a counter-frequency. If this works, it'll break the synchronization long enough for you to pull us and neutralize the freighter. If it doesn't, then we deal with what comes," the captain finished. "Do it." The generator hummed, building energy. The team watched the pulsar line on their handheld display. 5 seconds, 3, 2. They activated it. The effect was immediate. The slit convulsed inward, the core's light flaring white-hot. Across the ocean, the Sentinel's beams flickered. The platform's lights strobed erratically. The satellite array overhead shifted out of perfect alignment, wobbling as if the link had been struck. On the cutter's bridge, alarms erupted. Resonance destabilizing. The bridge is faltering. But even as they celebrated, the detainee's face changed. He wasn't relieved. He was listening. "They noticed," he said quietly. Below the waves, sonar picked up sudden movement. The Sentinels broke formation, their massive bodies rotating to face the cutter. One by one, their lights turned from blue to a violent, pulsing crimson. "They're locking onto us," the weapons officer whispered. The sky vortex began to buckle, but the Sentinels were now advancing. The ocean trembled as their propulsion systems engaged. The resonance might have been disrupted, but the Guardians were no longer passive. The countdown tone from the core shifted into a roar. The bridge wasn't broken yet. It was fighting back. The roar from the core deepened into something physical, low-frequency vibrations that rattled the freighter's structure and made the air itself feel thick. In the core chamber, the boarding team braced themselves against the walls as the floor buckled. Panels around the slit began to rearrange violently, almost like muscle tissue contracting in response to pain. "Captain," the team leader yelled through the unstable channel, the core's reacting hard. "We bought ourselves some time, but it's trying to repair the bridge. We can't hold this frequency forever. It's adapting to our countersignal." On the cutter's bridge, alarms layered over one another. The Sentinels had fully broken formation and were now closing in, massive hulls cutting through the water with deliberate, terrifying precision. Each movement they made displaced so much water that the cutter was lifted and dropped like a toy in their wake. "Distance to nearest Sentinel, 500 meters and closing," sonar called out. The captain's voice stayed steady, but his knuckles were white on the rail. "Weapons. Manual systems only. Targeting is still scrambled," the weapons officer replied. "We can fire, but we'd be shooting blind." "Do it. Put something between us and them." On deck, gunners swung the manual cannons toward the looming black forms. Explosions cracked across the water, tracer rounds arching toward the Sentinels. But when the shells impacted their surfaces, the result wasn't an explosion. They were absorbed. Ripples spread across the Sentinels' hulls, as if the metal itself had swallowed the energy. No damage. No reaction. Inside the freighter, the counter-frequency generator began to overheat. Steam hissed from its vents, warning lights flaring red. 30 seconds before it burns out," one of the techs shouted. The team leader's jaw clenched. "Then we finish this now. Boost it to max output." "That could overload it." "I'm not asking." The generator's hum rose into a scream, matching the core's pitch. For a moment, the chamber was a battlefield of opposing frequencies, alien precision against human improvisation. The slit pulsed erratically, panels bending inward as cracks of pure light split along its edges. Then the floor heaved violently. Something massive struck the freighter from below. On the cutter, the sonar operator shouted, "Contact beneath the freighter." One of the Sentinels just latched onto it. Through the starboard windows, they saw it. One of the colossal black shapes had risen directly beneath the freighter, locking its angular plates into the hull like claws. Water surged upward around them, creating whirlpools. "They're stabilizing the structure," the detainee said grimly. "They're not letting the bridge collapse. They'll hold it together by force if they have to." "Then we need to break that grip," the captain muttered. But before he could issue an order, the other Sentinels made their move. Two broke away, advancing directly on the cutter. Their lights intensified, and faint beams extended from their hulls, scanning the ship like a predator sizing up prey. "Whatever they're doing," the XO said, "it's about us." The detainee nodded slowly. "Because you interrupted the bridge. And to them, that means you're not neutral anymore." Inside the core chamber, the walls began to close in. Literally. The geometric panels folded inward, sealing the team in a shrinking space. "They're trying to crush us out," one of the techs shouted. "Keep that generator running," the leader yelled back. "If this bridge goes live, none of us are getting out." The generator's display flickered, output spiking, circuits on the verge of frying. The slit's light spasmed, its once perfect rhythm collapsing into chaotic bursts. For the first time, the core looked unstable. On the cutter, the two sentinels reached attack range. The air between them shimmered as their beams converged, not on the hull, but into the space above the ship, forming a suspended lattice of glowing lines. The energy built rapidly, crackling with invisible pressure. "They're charging something," the weapons officer said. The detainee's voice cut through the tension. "That's not a weapon you've ever seen. If they fire that, this ship doesn't get damaged. It gets removed." The captain stared at the lattice forming overhead. He had seconds to decide: retreat, which wasn't really an option, or strike back at something humanity didn't understand. Inside the freighter, the team leader saw the generator's timer hit its final threshold. "Captain," he shouted into the comm, "if we're going to act, it has to be now. We're at the breaking point." Outside, the Sentinel's beams intensified. Above, the vortex in the sky began to stabilize again, as if recovering from their disruption. The bridge wasn't broken. It was repairing itself faster than they could damage it. And below, the ocean rumbled once more. Sonar screamed. Multiple new signatures, deeper than the Sentinel's, and rising. Whatever was coming next was bigger. The sonar operator's voice fractured through the chaos, almost drowned out by the rising rumble beneath the hull. "New contacts, depth unknown, size estimates off the chart. Captain, I can't classify them. They're bigger than anything we've seen so far." The cutter vibrated as if some vast hand had gripped the ocean floor and was pushing upward. The water itself began to deform, swelling in rhythmic pulses that matched neither tide nor wind. Crew members stumbled as the deck tilted violently, coffee mugs and equipment clattering to the floor. "Stabilize the ship," the XO barked, but even as the engines roared, the cutter was being moved, not by current, but by something rising underneath. Through the rain-speckled bridge windows, the 5 sentinels could still be seen, enormous, cold, deliberate. But now they shifted position, widening their circle. It wasn't retreat. It was making room. And then the ocean split. A column of black water shot skyward as an immense shape breached the surface, not fast, but with monumental inevitability. This new structure dwarfed the sentinels. Its sides were smooth and curved like a massive shell, but along its surface ran intricate veins of light, threading into shifting patterns that echoed those of the core and platform. "It's the anchor," the detainee replied slowly. "When the bridge reaches critical phase, the prime node surfaces to stabilize the entire structure. Once it's active, you can't just destroy the freighter anymore. The resonance would reroute through it." On the cutter's bridge, the displays went black again. Lights dimmed. A deep harmonic tone, lower than any before, filled the air, rattling bone and steel alike. Crew members instinctively covered their ears, but it wasn't sound in the traditional sense. It was like standing inside a colossal speaker. "Captain, power levels are dropping across the board," the chief engineer shouted. "It's draining us, literally pulling energy out of our systems." "They're feeding the bridge," the detainee said, voice almost drowned out by the hum. "Your ship's becoming part of the circuit." In the freighter's core chamber, the team's generator was burning itself alive. Smoke curled from its casing. The team leader's hands shook as he adjusted the controls manually. The slit in the core spasmed, light convulsing, but the presence of the prime node above the water changed the balance. The counter-frequency no longer destabilized the resonance. It was being absorbed. "They're adapting," one of the techs said, voice cracking. "Our signal isn't enough anymore." "Then we boost it again," the leader growled. "We'll fry the whole system, maybe ourselves. That's better than watching this thing finish." Outside, the prime node began to emit vertical beams that connected not just to the platform and satellites but also downward, deep into the ocean. The sonar feeds, still partially functional, painted a terrifying picture. Vast shafts of energy descending into the trench. "They're opening something," the XO muttered. The detainee nodded grimly. "No, not opening. Extending. They're not just linking to orbit, they're anchoring into the seafloor. This bridge isn't a data link. It's a corridor." "A corridor to where?" The detainee's silence was answer enough. Suddenly, the cutter's deck lights flared, then died completely. The ship plunged into darkness. The only illumination came from the alien structures, their lights reflected in the restless sea. "Emergency power offline," engineering reported. "Batteries are being drained faster than they can switch over." "Captain," sonar called out shakily, "those deep contacts, they're still rising. Multiple, maybe dozens. Some are aligning directly beneath the prime node." Inside the freighter, the team leader shouted over the howling resonance, "We need a new plan. This generator won't last 30 more seconds. The node's overriding everything." "Then we change the game," one of the techs said, grabbing a coil of cable. "We can reroute the generator's core through the ship's hull, turn the freighter itself into a resonant disruptor. If we can make the hull sing at the right frequency, we might hit the node directly." "That'll take the entire ship down with it," another replied. The team leader's jaw tightened. This ship was never leaving anyway. Above, the sentinels repositioned, encircling both vessels and the prime node. The lattice in the sky spun faster, its light bending the clouds into spirals. On the cutter, the detainee finally spoke again, softly, but with a weight that cut through the alarms. "You don't understand what you're inside of. This isn't just a structure. It's a machine older than your nation's. And it's waking up because you interrupted its work." The captain looked out at the prime node towering over the sea, then back at the powerless bridge. "Then we give it something it doesn't expect." Below the deck, the freighter team began splicing cables, wiring the generator directly into the ship's frame. Sparks showered around them. Every second was bought with the groaning protest of alien technology trying to shut them out. On sonar, the deep contacts finally reached shallow water. "Captain," the operator whispered, "they're here." The prime node's lights flared once more, so bright that for a heartbeat, night became day. And in that light, shapes moved beneath the waves, vast, deliberate, and alive. The light from the prime node reached a blinding crescendo, flooding the cutter's bridge and the freighter's flooded corridors with an almost holy intensity. For a breathless moment, everything, waves, wind, and machinery, fell silent as if the entire ocean were holding its breath. Then, a deep subsonic crack reverberated through the water. The freighter's hull began to vibrate at the improvised frequency the team had forced through its frame. Metal screamed, bulkheads warped, and the generator's housing blew open like a bursting heart. A shockwave of harmonic energy rippled outward, slamming into the prime node. The structure shuddered. The lattice overhead flickered wildly. For the first time, the alien network faltered. "Hold it steady!" the team leader shouted as the generator overloaded. On the cutter's bridge, emergency power surged back for a split second, just long enough to see every sonar contact freeze mid-motion. The deep shapes below hesitated, their formation breaking. The prime node emitted a piercing, almost sentient wail. Then, fractures began to snake across its luminous shell. "They're destabilizing it," the XO breathed. But the cost was immediate. The freighter's hull, now acting as a resonant weapon, couldn't handle the stress. Plates ripped apart. Compartments flooded. The generator detonated in a blinding flash, sending a shockwave that tore through the node's light field like a hammer through glass. The sky lattice collapsed. One by one, the beams linking the sentinels flickered and died. The sentinels themselves lurched, their positions faltering like toppled pillars. Some sank back into the sea with thunderous splashes, while others simply vanished, disintegrating into arcs of light. The prime node convulsed, light spiraling chaotically. Then, with an almost reluctant groan, it began to sink. Not fast, but as if pulled down by the weight of its own failing energy. The trench below it swallowed the immense shape as the ocean roared back into dominance, waves crashing against the cutter in a chaotic ballet of foam and steel. "Bridge lattice is down," sonar yelled. "Node is retreating. Repeat, node is going under." The cutter's engines roared back to life, coughing but functional. Floodlights pierced the night, revealing the freighter breaking apart in the distance. The team's transmission cut off mid-sentence. No escape pods. No signals. The detainee stared at the dark water where the node had vanished. "You think you won," he said softly. "But this was just one anchor. The network has others. And now, it knows you can fight back." The captain met his gaze, the weight of what had happened settling over him like a lead shroud. "Then we'll be ready next time." As dawn broke over the Atlantic, the once alien glow was gone. Only wreckage, silence, and the uneasy knowledge that something ancient had stirred beneath the waves remained. The Coast Guard cutter turned slowly toward home, its crew forever changed. But far below, in the dark trench where the prime node had vanished, faint lights flickered once more, like embers refusing to die.